Back in 1965, a nervous 15-year-old named David Sklar had just transferred into an exclusive New England prep school, Phillips Exeter Academy, for his sophomore year. About 2 weeks after starting the fall term, he says all the new boys at the school, about 200 of them, were herded into a large conference room and sorted alphabetically. They didn't know why.
We were then sent into a smaller room, and in that smaller room, we were then told to take off all of our clothes. And then we were photographed, and we were photographed in 3 poses. One was straight on, and one was back, and one was sideways. And that was it. We weren't told why this was done or what was going to happen to these photographs, what they were being used for.
Sklar says the process happened every year, at least for a while, and it didn't seem to raise any eyebrows. However, today, we'd call it abusive.
I would say it was a traumatic experience for me because I was new to the school and I was very, I would say, insecure. I was worried that I was going to flunk out of school and not be able to do the work. I came from a public school that was a pretty poor public school, and I was going to a private school that was very, very competitive. So I was always kind of anxious anyway to begin with, and then having to stand up naked in front of someone taking my photograph was, well, highly embarrassing and sort of humiliating.
Today, Sklar is an associate dean and professor in the College of Health Solutions at Arizona State University and former editor-in-chief of the journal Academic Medicine. He's also author of the book Atlas of Men, a novel based on what happened at Phillips Exeter. But he says the boys there were far from alone. He found out later that the same kind of pictures were being taken of entering freshmen at most Ivy League colleges and 7 sister schools like Vassar and Wellesley.
And it was written about in the New York Times as sort of an expose of this research that a professor named William Sheldon had been doing at several colleges, and similar pictures were being taken and people were also being photographed nude in the same way. And so I read about that, found out about it, and then talked with the school physician who I continued to stay in contact with after I graduated, and asked him about it. And I said, I wonder if these photographs that were taken have anything to do with that research study. And he said, oh, yes, we were part of that.
Sklar says students weren't asked for permission, and nobody he knew of ever thought to object. Parents were never notified, and at some schools, it apparently went on for nearly 30 years.
Schools that were engaged in this, that were doing this, certainly should have known better. I think this was unethical research, and it was unfortunate, and I think that it's unclear how much it harmed people. Now I think if we found out that a bunch of 14 or 15-year-old boys or girls, were forced to strip naked and have themselves photographed, I think we'd be pretty appalled. I think at that time, it was still early in our understanding of the potential harm that research subjects might encounter. And it was a time when I think science was very well regarded as potentially having contributed to the end of World War II. The atomic bomb, as much as it was very dangerous, it also contributed to ending the war before a lot more people might have been killed. And I think there was sort of this pride in science and a willingness to kind of accept that although there might be some risk with science, that the benefits would outweigh the risks.
However, today you have to wonder. The research claimed to have a good purpose, but Sheldon's theory has long since been thrown out. It was called somatotyping,
where you could predict a person's personality or future for leadership, things like that, based upon the calculation of certain scores related to their body type that the person had. And there's 3 main body types that people usually can consider as sort of the main types. These are like more or less the extremes. The ectomorph is the kind of tall, thin person. The mesomorph is more the kind of football player, very muscular type person. And then the endomorph is more like the Santa Claus type looking person. And the idea of the theory was that everybody has a certain amount of each of those main types of body tissues, and that by taking the pictures and then calculating what kind of a body type a person has, that you could then predict what would be their best, say, occupation or leadership potential or something like that.
Sklar says that according to the theory, people are fated to live a certain kind of life based on their body type, and there's not much anyone can do to change it. At one time, he says, Sheldon's work was considered legitimate science. It also argued that if a child's fate could be accurately predicted, they could be directed toward an appropriate occupation. However, the theory could also be twisted.
It really goes back even to the work, sadly, that the Nazis had been doing, this eugenics kind of theories where there were these ideas that you could breed the perfect human species by getting people with the right physical and mental characteristics together and getting them married and having children and so on. And that there was this sort of ideal type, ideal body type, ideal leader type.
Today, it seems incredible that such an experiment could ever be allowed. That's why now research needs to go through layers of approval before it starts. But for Sklar, the biggest lesson isn't how far we've come in protecting our kids. It's in how far we have yet to go to keep from labeling others or allowing it on ourselves.
You should not feel limited by certain characteristics that have been imposed upon you, particularly those from, in this case, it was, I think, very faulty scientific thinking. But even now, as we have genetics, and we're learning a lot about genetics, and some people may be told, genetically, you're not going to be quite smart enough to be a doctor. And I kind of feel like people who are motivated and have grit or perseverance are often going to overcome some of what other people might think are their limitations.
You can find out more information about Dr. David Sklar and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, follow Radio Health Journal on Facebook, Instagram, and X. This segment originally aired in February of 2019 and was written and produced by Reed Pence. Our lead producer is Kristen Farah. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Greg Johnson.